Good afternoon, everyone. This is John Rust on the Radio on Freedom 95, 950 AM and 95.9 FM on your radio dial, the right station for talk, broadcasting all across the beautiful fruited plain of our beautiful state of Indiana. Welcome to the show, Justin.
Thank you. Great to be here as always. Appreciate it.
Great to have you back. So, folks, last week we had the catastrophic Republican results in the election. This week, Republicans, unfortunately, are still gloating about it, and Steve Bannon has a warning about this. And this was in the Politico. He says, Steve Bannon has a warning for Republicans gloating about Mondami's win. Don't. Remember, folks, Jim Banks was just ecstatic over the win because he felt it was good for Indiana, because then apparently all the New Yorkers would be moving to Indiana. Well, Indiana is a wonderful state. It's a great state for business. It's a great state for schools. It's a great place to raise your family. It's odd that Jim Banks is saying that when he himself moved to Virginia, but thinks it's great that Mondami won in New York City, this radical leftist Democrat. So after that election, I think the Republicans, after we had our hat handed to us again, this is what Rob Kendall had to say about all this. He said, so for all the Trump and Republicans huffing and puffing about how the shutdown would create all these reforms, because then they could fire all these workers, every one of them is coming back. Exactly as we told you. Massive Joe Biden government, full steam ahead. Folks, unfortunately, the Republicans caved to themselves. They didn't cave to the Democrats. They caved to themselves. The continuing resolution that Congress just passed this week that reopens the government funds the U.S. federal government at Joe Biden levels. That's not right. We elected conservatives. We elected Donald J. Trump as president. We elected Republicans to control the House and the Senate. What on earth is the Republican majority Congress doing passing funding resolutions at Joe Biden levels of spending? You know, folks, the American middle class is dying. Your kids can't afford to buy a house. Our tax dollars are being sent overseas. Our Congress is corrupt, purchased by globalists and other countries. That's from Dan Hill. You know, people are deeply unhappy with what the Republican federal government is doing. And folks, again, Republicans control the House, Senate, and presidency. It's the Republicans who are massively growing the government debt. CNN just had a poll out, and it says people think the Republicans have made the economy worse. 67% of independents believe the economy is worse under Republican control. Of those aged 18 to 34, 66% think the economy is worse under these career politician Republican establishment control in D.C. You know, the economy is always the number one issue. And unfortunately, our career politicians, they don't care about the economy. They only care about being reelected. That's why Jim Banks and Todd Young and Aaron Houchin and Jefferson Shreve and every other member of the Indiana Republican delegation voted for trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars in new debt. If they were economically conservative, there's no way they would do that. And what is the direct result of all this massive new government spending and all this new government debt? You know, folks, unfortunately, it looks like we're entering a recession. The U.S. freight market is in a recession. U.S. truckload index fell to its lowest level since 2014 as fewer goods are being moved across the country. According to FreightWaves, and that's who monitors the numbers of trucks in service, that sector is in a goods recession, a setup that could force many small trucking firms out of business. That's from Global Markets Investor on Twitter. Why is the economy teetering right now? It's because the dollar is worth less and less because Congress keeps spending more and more money we don't have. You know, the Republicans are talking about how Walmart just announced that the prices for a Thanksgiving dinner are now down 25% since Joe Biden was president in 2024. Well, you got to remember, folks, in 2024, the Walmart list had 21 items. The 2025 Walmart Thanksgiving meal only contained 15 items. It's an apples to oranges comparison. You know, the one sector in the economy that is allegedly booming and where all the money is going is AI, artificial intelligence. Unfortunately, you know who's paying for that, folks? You are. You're paying for it through higher electricity costs. That is the direct tax that you're paying for all these massive new data centers coming up all across Indiana. So on your electric rates, they went up 9% last year and up 17% this year. That is a direct result of two things. Massive new increased demand of electricity all across the state of Indiana for these data centers and for the establishment Republican GOP pushing wind and solar farms, which are extremely expensive. And remember, in Kentucky, they still get most of their energy, the vast majority, produced by coal. In Kentucky, per kilowatt, it is 12 cents. That's the cost that consumers pay in Kentucky for electricity. In Indiana, it's 17 cents per kilowatt. We pay 30% more than the state of Kentucky because the state of Indiana has abandoned our coal-powered plants, and the career politicians in Indianapolis are pushing to close the existing coal-powered power plants we have today. Instead, they want more solar and more wind, which is exponentially more expensive. Again, just look at the price that Kentucky pays, much, much, much less than the state of Indiana. Only 12 cents per kilowatt, and we're already to 17 cents. There is just a massive price to be paid for this artificial intelligence. And folks, what's it really going for? What is that artificial intelligence being used for? It's being used to cut your jobs. So not only are you being asked to subsidize the electricity that these data centers take, but oftentimes that technology is going to be used to cut your jobs. And this is where I disagree with Vice President J.D. Vance on it. He says J.D. Vance is optimistic about AI automating American jobs. I'm not optimistic about that. I'm very negative on that. We need American jobs for Americans. Well, you don't want to be replaced by a computer, do you, Justin?
No, I don't. And it's gonna continue to affect the economy in more ways than just one.
Well, it's already happening, folks. U.S. employers announced 153,000 job cuts just in October, marking a 175% surge and the highest for any October since 2003. And that's from the Kobayashi letter. And you know what's sad about this OpenAI, folks? It's a Ponzi scheme.
It really is.
And guess what? People are starting to realize they're now getting ready to line up for federal bailouts of all this artificial intelligence because what's happening, folks, behind the scenes, the Metas and Googles are just shuffling money back and forth to make it look like all these schemes are paying off. But it's just shuffling behind the scenes. And now they're saying the federal government has to back the bonds they're using to build these data centers. No way. That's a hard no. Absolutely, positively, no. Stop. Data centers, folks. I have a billboard in Greenwood on this. It says data centers are theft. If you're going down the interstate on I-65, look on the right, you'll see a digital billboard up. It has the John Rush Show being advertised on Freedom 95. Or the main headline on it is data centers are theft, along with property tax and tolls. Folks, this is not something I'm just saying lightly on this program. We as Hoosiers have to stand up to these elected officials in Indianapolis that are pushing these data centers on us.
So,
well, look how much water they use. Look how much energy they use. The amount of water is astronomical these data centers use.
And it gets even worse because it's not just Indiana, but a lot of these, red states. I mean, Tennessee Rhino Governor Bill Lee recently invited the World Economic Forum, and he had a World Economic Forum summit with Vanderbilt University the other day. He posted this on his official Facebook account. So-called, Republicans doing this. Can we just follow Ron DeSantis in Florida and say no to the data center, say no to the globalism, say no to all this stuff that's destroying the economy, destroying our land? It's a complete nonsense.
If you have a World Economic Forum banner behind you on a podium, you have no business calling yourself a Republican.
I agree, 100%.
Pure and simple.
And Bill Lee in Tennessee, he's not a Republican, he's a Rhino, and
he's another Jim Banks and Todd Young.
Exactly. By the way, you guys aren't Republicans because you don't.
Well, you're not a Republican, or you're not a conservative. Let me put it this way: they are absolutely career politician, establishment Republicans, both of them.
Absolutely.
But they are not conservatives. You are not a conservative if you vote for trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars of new government debt repeatedly, which both of them have.
And then complain about Joe Biden even though he's no longer in office.
And Joe Biden is not president, and both Jim Banks and Todd Young are voting for Biden levels of government debt again. repeatedly again. But back on this OpenAI, this is from Unusual Whales. OpenAI is requesting U.S. government support to help guarantee financing for the massive investment in AI chips and data centers it needs for expansion, per Bloomberg. Apparently, paying pretty much no taxes thanks to state and local tax breaks isn't enough for the data centers. So, folks, the state's not taking in income tax on that. So, folks, the state's not taking in tax on these data centers, but you sure as heck are paying for it yourself through higher and higher electricity costs here in the state of Indiana. So, folks, the national debt just hit $38 trillion 2 months after we crossed the $37 trillion line. And all this money, I like to bring an example that I think brings it home. You know what that is? For every household in America in the last year, it's $40,000. That's how much more debt Jim Banks, Todd Young, Aaron Hounshin, and Jefferson Shreve have voted for you to have hanging around your neck that you and your kids and your kids' kids someday will have to pay.
Think about me as a young conservative Republican who has to face all this, and it's not the American dream. It's the complete opposite.
And we're getting record tax revenue here in the state of Indiana, and property taxes keep going up, and the government here in Indiana keeps growing. You know, this is from a friend of mine on Facebook. He posted, I pay $4,506 on a house I own in property tax. Property tax is nuts. My house payment was never that much. Folks, that's what the establishment GOP is doing to taxpayers here in the state of Indiana. We're out of time for this segment. When we come back, we're going to get right back into this. This is John Rust on the Radio. Welcome back, folks. This is John Rust on the Radio on Freedom 95. Before the break, we were talking about property taxes in the state of Indiana. I'm here in the studio with Justin. Welcome back, Justin.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Always great to be here.
So while we're talking about property taxes, guess what's up with BlackRock? BlackRock is this giant investment group going around and buying people's homes, forcing the property prices to go up and up, for a house next to you. So your house is being assessed higher and higher because a lot of times your property next to you is being sold to someone as an investment and not as a home, forcing this balloon of prices to keep going up and up. And the state of Indiana is just loving it because then they can assess your property taxes higher and higher every year, which they are doing. And then they have all this money to spend on artwork and for roundabouts, for these massive new government centers. And we heard the horror story of the one in Monroe County, which was over $140 million for a new courthouse annex building in Bloomington. Because the tax revenue from that you're paying for your home is rolling in, folks. The Indiana state government is swimming in revenue. Even though they just raised taxes $1 billion this year, we are seeing record amounts of revenue because of how property taxes are unfairly assessed based on market value.
It's unfair. And then you just mentioned, too, the roundabouts. I say put 4 stop signs and, for added safety, put the bright LED flashing lights on at night. Way much less expensive and more safer and more efficient than the roundabouts.
But back on AI, this is Ron DeSantis' quote on this. He says, no, the government should not be a backstop for all these data centers. This is his exact tweet. No, privatize profits and socialize losses, the enduring quest of being too big to fail. Folks, we cannot let these data centers become the next Enron where you, the taxpayer, have to foot the bill. This is from Daniel Horowitz on this. Well. So much for the free market. Too big to fail is happening quicker than I thought. This is from Julia Brigden. I smell a rat. Why does Sam Altman and OpenAI need the taxpayer to guarantee their debt if they are going to make hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars in profits? Has he just done a cash analysis and realized he's cash flow short? And folks, this is talking about where OpenAI seeks government backing to boost AI investments. Folks, it's a Ponzi scheme. It's the tulip bulb scandal all over again. ChatGPT creator OpenAI, the world's largest private company, is asking the U.S. government to provide loan guarantees for its massive infrastructure expansion that will eventually cost more than $1 trillion. Speaking at a Wall Street Journal business conference, OpenAI CFO Sarah Fryer explained that the government backing could help attract the enormous investment needed for AI computing and infrastructure, given the uncertain lifespan of AI data centers. This is where we're looking for an ecosystem of banks, private equity, maybe even government. Folks, if they're saying maybe even today, that means they are guaranteed going to be looking for you, the taxpayer, to bail them out for this Ponzi scheme.
We're the ones that will have to pay for it, and they're open about their plans.
Well, this is from Don Johnson. This is the AI data center bubble is the biggest bubble in human history by orders of magnitude. This is from Hedge Markets on Twitter. Meta is hiding $30 billion in AI infrastructure debt off its balance sheet using special purpose vehicles, echoing the financial engineering that triggered Enron's collapse and the 2008 mortgage crisis. You know, folks, I called this several months ago when I said these data centers are the new Enron. They absolutely are. This is from Daniel Horowitz. I've never seen such financial gaslighting before. No technology that is really on the cusp of saving the world needs you to sacrifice land, food, energy, and water and back bailouts to make it viable. You never saw smartphone developers cycling in and out of the White House 2 decades ago, getting all sorts of favors and getting the government to monopolize the public square on its behalf. This is so much like the Green New Deal than previous iterations of the Industrial Revolution or Digital Revolution. Yesterday, they dropped all pretenses. This is from Joe Wiesenthal. The CFO of OpenAI says people aren't exuberant enough about AI. Justin, are you exuberant? Are you exuberant about AI?
It's a good question. The answer is no, the complete opposite, because it's already showing the destruction of what's going to happen. And as you mentioned earlier on the show, it's going to ruin the jobs.
Why aren't you exuberant about that?
Well, because it ruins. It's taking away everything. It's taking.
And they
away
want you to
future.
subsidize it through paying for their electricity, through your rates going up, and they want your tax dollars to back their bonds to pay for these data centers.
And my answer as a young conservative Republican is absolutely no. And I'll say that again, it's a resounding no. I don't want these data centers because it doesn't just affect me, it affects you.
Well, I believe in the free. I believe in the free market. Data centers are okay if they pay their own way. It's totally different if they expect us, the taxpayer, to subsidize them to make them viable. Because what we are reading now is they're very worried about all these data centers going in that cost billions of dollars that will be completely out of date in just a few years. And so all this meager income they're getting from AI today. And folks, there's been a lot of hype about how AI is wonderful, for creating memes. It's fun for that. But is that really economically necessary for our economy? No, absolutely not. If someone wants a meme, wonderful. That's fine. But you shouldn't have to pay for it through our tax dollars, and that's what they're wanting to do today. This is from Don Johnson again. Facebook takes a page from Enron's playbook. From Chuco to Bagnet, almost exactly 24 years after Enron imploded, Meta and Facebook is using a super complex bond deal to finance its AI build-out. Have we hit peak AI hype? This is from More Perfect Union. Meta is now running pro data center ads featuring small towns. The ads tout job creation, but a data center may only create 50 long-term jobs. Residents near data centers have complained about nonstop noise, pollution, wells running dry, and rapidly rising electric bills. Folks, it's not just near the data centers. That's statewide in Indiana, how our electric rates have went up 9% last year and 17% this year. This is Ron DeSantis' response on this. That Meta would feel the need to run this ad is definitely a data point about the unpopularity of hyperscale data centers.
Kudos to Governor DeSantis for saying what needs to be said.
Well, and Jim Banks is running around clinking champagne glasses with Mark Zuckerberg in Virginia.
That's real conservative, right?
Mark Zuckerberg's toy in Virginia. I guess that's what you would call him. So, folks, on these data centers, there are over 10,000 megawatts of big tech data center proposals currently in Indiana. Guess how much power these data centers are going to use? There are 13 new data centers being proposed for Indiana. It's estimated that these just 13 data centers could use 80% of Indiana's total electric generation. So, folks, they're going to turn off the lights for your house. I would definitely not install quote-unquote smart technology to control your furnace and your air conditioning, because the government's going to be looking at ways to restrict your power use to keep these data centers going in the future. I see that coming, and that may sound like a conspiracy theory, but I tell you, I would just not be installing these quote-unquote smart thermostats.
Anything but smart.
Because, well, what's happening in California is they are restricting people from being able to keep their houses cool in the summer to keep the data centers going. Data centers get priority. Your house does not in the eyes of government. And you think, well, that's happening in California. Guess what, folks? It's being proposed in the state of Ohio, right next door. There's a bill in the state legislature of Ohio right now to make it to where power companies can dial down your thermostat in the winter to save electricity so they have enough to power the data centers. So if you have your thermostat set on 65 degrees in the winter, they're going to dial it down, who knows to what, 45, hopefully to keep it above freezing.
So the pipes don't burst, but even then it's cold. And think about this, Ohio Governor, the Rhino, Mike DeWine, of course he'll be all in for all this as well once it gets through the legislature there.
So, folks, these data centers are just a bad deal all the way around. Not only are they going to be used to try to take your job, they're going to use you to pay for it, and they're going to make your standard of living worse by you not being able to control the temperature in your home to a level that you find comfortable, because the data centers will get priority. That's what today's establishment career politicians are doing to us today. Folks, talking about Indiana, when we come back, we're going to talk about gunfire damaging vehicles south of Monument Circle in downtown Indianapolis and what our Republican Attorney General had to say about it. It's shocking. Folks, this is John Rust on Rust on the Radio. We'll be right back. Welcome back, folks. This is John Rust on the Radio on Freedom 95 at 950 AM and 95.9 FM on your radio dial, the right station for talk. I'm here in the studio with Justin, and right before the break, we were talking about gunfire damaging buildings and vehicles near Monument Circle, downtown Indianapolis. So Indiana Attorney General, Republican, Todd Rokita, announced he wants President Trump to send in the National Guard into our state because our Republican government cannot control our own cities and streets. It's just unthinkable to me.
It is. That
you can now have to worry about being shot walking around Monument Circle in our own state.
Right at the center of downtown. And the fact is,
and what bothers me, Justin, on this is how they're trying to brush off responsibility from state government to the federal government. We have a Republican supermajority in the state house here in Indianapolis that controls the entire state. We have a Republican governor. We have a Republican lieutenant governor. We should be policing Indianapolis ourselves. I don't think we should be calling on the federal government to come in and do the jobs that our own elected officials, who are elected to very important, governor. Where is the governor on this?
That's what I'd like to know, too. And look at Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. The FDLE, Florida Department of Law Enforcement, had reported the other year that crime in Florida was at a 50-year low. And my message is this: do something about it. My message to this: don't just talk about it. Do something to protect innocent lives, because I am also pro-life when it comes to making sure that families and friends and community members in our great state of Indiana, we should be able to go to our capital city without fear any time of day or night. It's egregious that nothing has been done. And I would call on the governor, follow Florida Governor Ron DeSantis and what he's done, not just with the statewide crime, but taking on the cities and actually doing something about it. There's proven results, because I want my fellow Hoosiers safe.
Exactly, because the Republicans, folks, again, have a supermajority in the state legislature. Indianapolis has a Democratic mayor. He is obviously inept at doing his job. Why aren't the Republicans taking over the city as they should be, as our elected officials?
Send in the ISP.
Why is Indiana being governed this way? Instead of the governor promoting drone use, instead let's concentrate on crime in Indianapolis. Why on earth should our capital city be allowed to degenerate to such a low level that you don't feel safe walking on Monument Circle after a Colts game? That's wrong. What I specifically don't like is our Attorney General, who is our chief law enforcement officer of the state of Indiana, saying, well, we can't do anything. It's up to the president. If Joe Biden was president, would Todd Rokita be asking that? In the end, folks, we have a Republican government here in the state of Indiana that should be taking care of this problem today. Well, we're supposed to be anti-crime in the Republican Party. Unfortunately, we have people like Todd Young and Jim Banks who both voted for the First Step Act, which releases criminals from prison early. Today, the law's still on the books. So fentanyl dealers have been released because of this law that Jim Banks and Todd Young voted for.
That's a huge crisis that hasn't been solved.
Sex offenders have been released because of this law. A terrorist has been released because of this law. I'm calling on Jim Banks and Todd Young, repeal the First Step Act.
Get rid of it entirely.
Make sure it passes. Attach it to legislation that has to be passed so that we can once again have safe streets here in Indiana. We shouldn't be releasing criminals onto the streets early, but Jim Banks and Todd Young both think that's a great idea. Well, it's the Republican Party in the state of Indiana is not being Republican. They're not being conservative. We're supposed to be very hard on crime, and instead we are so soft on crime here in the state. John Adams had a quote, and I want to read this, folks. He said, there are two ways to conquer and enslave a country. One is by the sword. The other is by debt. That's by former President John Adams. What we're specifically talking about, which is this harebrained idea that the Republicans in Washington are pushing, which is a 50-year mortgage for your home. It's an incredibly bad idea. This is from Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene. I don't like 50-year mortgages as the solution to the housing affordability crisis. It will ultimately reward the banks, mortgage lenders, and home builders, while people pay far more in interest over time and die before they ever pay off their home. In debt forever, in debt for life. And folks, what she's specifically talking about is this proposal being put forth in Washington to solve the housing crisis, to just increase the length of loan terms. Folks, I'm going to give you some examples on this, on why it's a terrible idea. So in 2021, a $500,000 house at the 3% interest rate would have a $2,108 payment for a 30-year mortgage. The total interest payments over 30 years would be $257,000. Folks, because interest rates are now higher because Jim Banks and Todd Young keep voting for massive new government debt, causing the interest rates to keep going up, now you would have to pay a 7% interest rate for a $500,000 house, and a mortgage over 50 years would mean over $1 million in interest rate payments, just for interest, not for the house, just in interest to the banks. I guess Jim Banks likes that because it's going to the banks.
Yeah, there you go. And
but it's bankrupting you.
He can take it to the bank in Virginia, I guess.
With a 30-year mortgage, your first 10 years are nothing but interest payments, and by the end you've paid 15 years worth of interest. Under the Washington GOP's proposal to go to 50-year loans, you'd pay over 22 years of interest. Folks, you'd be working for 22 years for the banks. This is from Bob Good. 50-year mortgages would prevent people from earning equity or true home ownership and essentially create lifelong renters. This is a terrible idea. I agree, absolutely. It is an awful idea. And there was soon a parody of this. And you heard about this on Twitter, but it was fake. But it was still, unfortunately, humorous in a way. The White House announces the Department of Transportation and Commerce to make vehicle ownership all a reality by introducing a 15-year car loan. That's a joke, folks. Extending the amount of debt over time is always a bad idea because you are always just going to be paying more to the bank over time. This is from Fluent in Finance on Twitter. 50-year mortgages, a cutting-edge strategy to the housing crisis. You only pay $500,000 more in interest, but it's $600 less each month. Well, there's truth to that. You're paying $600 less each month, but you're going to be paying it 20 years longer. And that trade-off, folks, devastate your retirement goals. You know, $500,000 is what you're giving to the banks on that. $500,000, that's going to pay for a lot of cruise vacations. That's going to pay for your dream trip to Hawaii. It's going to pay for your grandkids to go to school. Instead, our Republican leadership in Washington is pushing this new asinine 50-year mortgage idea, which is just goes against all financial sense. Other than people like Jim Banks and Todd Young, who believe it's okay to take on more debt because they both repeatedly vote for trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars of new debt. Folks, you know what the banks are going to do with that $600 a month? If you invest $600 a month, invest it at 8%, over 50 years, that's $4 million. $4 million is a lot more than $500,000. That's what the banks want. That's why they're pushing this crazy plan to make people pay longer terms for their house loans. And that's why these banks are backing people like Jim Banks and Todd Young. So, Justin, the age of the average home buyer over the last 100 years, in 1925, folks, it was 25 years old. It was 27 years old as late as 1975. In 2005, it was 31 years old. In 2015, it was 31 years old. But this correlates exactly to the elections of Jim Banks and Todd Young. They were both sent to Congress in 2017. Back then, the median age was still 31. Just after all the massive debt that both Jim Banks and Todd Young have voted for, and its exact correlation to interest rates, making homes unaffordable for people. Today, the median age is 40 years old. It has jumped 9 years just in the last 7 years because we have these spendthrifts in Washington, like Jim Banks and Todd Young, who are spending us into bankruptcy. You know, as I said in the show last week, his name should be Jim Bankruptcy because that is exactly what he is doing to the American dream.
I have to say I second that. Jim Bankruptcy, that's a perfect name for him.
So, folks, you know it's a bad idea on a 50-year mortgage if Andrew Yang of the Democratic Party is pushing it. He thinks it's a wonderful idea. He says a 100-year mortgage is even better. No, absolutely not. This is from Brandon on Twitter. I ran a side-by-side comparison of a 30-year versus 50-year mortgage on a $500,000 loan at 6% interest. Here are the takeaways. In a 30-year mortgage, 17% of your payments in the beginning of the loan go towards principal. In a 50-year mortgage, only 5% go to principal. In a 30-year, 25% of your payment goes to the principal by year 7. In a 50-year, that doesn't happen until year 26 of the term of your loan. So in 50-year, it takes 38 years of interest payments. Rather than you paying for your house, you're really just paying rent to the bank. A lot of rent.
And all the while, the property tax issue still hasn't been solved for our state.
So, folks, when we come back, we're going to get into Senator Jim Banks again. Jim Banks called for an influx of immigrants.
In the Atlantic magazine in 2017.
And, you know, an influx of immigrants? No. Folks, this is John Rust on Rust on the Radio. We'll be right back. Welcome back, folks. This is John Rust on Freedom 95, the John Rust Show at 950 AM and 95.9 FM on your radio dial. So welcome back, folks. A socialist is someone that wants everything you have except your job. Everything that's free is paid for by someone who works. Anything that requires someone else's labor is not a human right. You don't have the right to expect the work and sweat and tears and taxes of your neighbor for you to sit in your house and do nothing. And folks, what I'm talking about are SNAP food stamps. Why did the Department of Indiana Education have an app for illegals to guide them to SNAP benefits? This is from Ron DeSantis. Federal law prohibits allowing someone to immigrate here if they are in the public charge. Yet the majority of legal immigrant households use taxpayer-financed welfare benefits. Illegal alien-headed households are even worse. Well,
And
we want to help people.
Help people here in our own backyard.
And we want people to get jobs and to be productive members of society. Well, federal spending on SNAP, food stamps, has essentially doubled since 2019, doubled in the last 5 years. This is from Wall Street Mav. Was SNAP, aka food stamps, massively expanded during COVID and then never brought back down to where it was before? Seems like it could easily be cut by a third or so, probably more. There were 17 million people on food stamps in 2000. Now there are 43 million people. Folks, I am always absolutely for a safety net, but I think there has to be time limits on it, and there has to be work requirements for it. Unfortunately, it has become a system now where you go into a grocery store and you see people using their SNAP cards to pay for their carts, and you see the food items they buy. It's better than what you and I would be buying. Did you know that people can use SNAP and EBT for DoorDash from 7-Eleven? What a lazy, gross, and offensive waste of our taxpayer dollars. So you're paying for someone to get some junk food from 7-Eleven to be delivered to someone's house who is too lazy to go out and even pick that up. So you're paying for it both ways. You're paying for the delivery and for the product.
And meanwhile, Florida got 30,000 people, at least according to the official Hope Florida website, off of a reduced government assistance, and they've done it the right way.
Well, why are our tax dollars subsidizing lobster for SNAP recipients? Whole Foods is advertising that lobster tail is SNAP EBT eligible. Would you like some lobster tail?
It does sound good.
There are 21 states that even refuse to send their SNAP data to the USDA. These are California, Colorado, Connecticut, Delaware, Hawaii, Illinois, Maine, Maryland, Massachusetts, Michigan, Minnesota, Nevada, New Jersey, New Mexico, New York, Oregon, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, Vermont, Virginia, home of Jim Banks, Washington, and of course, Washington, D.C. All those states refuse to send their SNAP data to Washington. SNAP benefits to California. This is from Tony Segura. In 2019, it was just under $6 billion in SNAP benefits to the state of California. It has ballooned to over $11 million after 2021. This is from President Donald J. Trump. SNAP benefits, which increased by billions and billions of dollars, many-fold during crooked Joe Biden's disastrous term in office, due to the fact that they were haphazardly handed to anyone for the asking, as opposed to just those in need, which is the purpose of SNAP, will be given only when the radical left Democrats open up the government, which they can easily do and not before. Thank you for the attention to this matter, President Donald J. Trump. So, folks, this is from the Kabaisi letter. Grocery prices are surging. U.S. grocery prices have risen 5.3% year over year as of July 2025. To put this differently, if a family spends $1,000 a month or $12,000 a year on groceries, this marks an average annual increase of $636. So, folks, I want to get into another topic here. This is from Ken Colbert on Twitter. Where is Attorney General Todd Rokita? Google is creating data centers in Indiana, and Governor Braun just created an executive order requiring drones. See the connection? The Indiana Department of Motor Vehicles is knowingly selling your data without our consent. See the connection? This is from Attorney General Kim Paxton. I'm glad to announce that Google has now signed a historic $1.375 billion settlement, aka fine, with Texas, the largest ever, with a single state. If big tech thinks they can get away with abusing your data and illegally spying on Texans without consequences, I will prove them wrong. Where is Attorney General Todd Rokita? Google is creating data centers in Indiana, and Governor Braun just created an executive order regarding drones. The Indiana Bureau of Motor Vehicles is knowingly selling our data without our consent. See the connection? This is from Wall Street Math. If AI needs all this new electric grid capacity, then AI needs to fund it. Somehow I suspect our household electricity rates are going to go up 2 times to fund AI, which AI makes many jobs obsolete, and then we can't afford the electricity. This is from an article by CNBC. OpenAI says U.S. needs more power to stay ahead of China in artificial intelligence. Electrons are the new oil. And this is talking about these data centers, folks. Virginia is home to a significant number of data centers. There are 576 data centers listed in Virginia, primarily located in Northern Virginia. I think that's where Jim Banks lives, right?
Yeah, Virginia's third U.S. Senator, Tim Kaine, Mark Warner, and Jim Bankruptcy.
Yep. The concentration of data centers in Northern Virginia is notable due to its proximity to Washington, D.C., and the associated infrastructure. And we're talking about the filibuster. President Trump has called on the Republicans and the Senate to do away with it, and I agree 100%. Why? Listen to this. This is from James Carville, who was the campaign manager for Bill Clinton. James Carville lays out a plan for Democrats to expand the Supreme Court to 13 justices, then pass statehood for D.C. and Puerto Rico, and add 4 Democratic senators. Republicans will never win another election under this plan. Folks, you have to remember the filibuster almost went away in the previous Senate term, but 2 Democrat senators stood in the way. That was Kyrsten Sinema of Arizona and Joe Manchin of West Virginia. So, folks, Kyrsten Sinema is not even in the Senate anymore. They will absolutely have the votes to do away with the filibuster, and they absolutely will. A lot of Republicans are clutching their pearls and saying the nuclear option is really dangerous because, folks, this is the truth on it. Because then voters will see that Republicans won't use it to pass meaningful conservative laws. That's the quandary. I understand President Trump wanting to end the filibuster, but we have to have conservatives in Washington who will pass conservative laws, not all this whitewash like Jim Banks and Todd Young, where they vote for trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars in new debt. Again, the Democrats, Elizabeth Warren, who Jim Banks loves to pal around with, says it's time for the Senate to end the filibuster, protect voting rights, and defend our democracy. Bernie Sanders, I happen to think that at the end of the day, to deliver for working people, we have to get rid of the filibuster. Folks, they're saying it out loud. They absolutely will get rid of the filibuster. We need to get rid of the filibuster, but then we actually need to have laws that are enacted by the Republican majority that are actually fiscally conservative. So, folks, we're out of time. Thank you so much for listening. I want to close with my father's favorite Bible verse, Psalm 118, verse 24. This is the day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. I will see you all again next week on the radio. This is John Rust signing off.